Kyle Sampson has testified that he kept you generally informed about the process of identifying U.S. attorneys who might be asked to step down. Did you ever ask him for specific information about who he was speaking to in connection with this process, or what he was doing to follow up and check out the information he received?
Senator, what I recall is telling Mr. Sampson, make sure the White House is appropriately advised, because these are political appointees, and telling him that I expected him to consult with the senior leadership of the department, people who would know best the qualifications, the performance of United States attorneys.
This is what you told him to do, but I'm asking whether you checked back with him after he did it.
Senator, I can't recall whether or not at the time he made the recommendations that I said, does this, who did you consult with, and whose recommendations are these? I'll tell you what I understood. What I understood.
Let me continue. That's a sufficient answer. You said you don't recall having done that. Did you at any time probe the information that Kyle Sampson provided to you, including the recommendations that he ultimately made in the 7 U.S. attorneys to be fired?
Sir, I don't recall having specific questions or about specific reasons. I do recall that when the recommendations were made, I was not surprised to see 5 of the names on the list.
Did you ever talk to Deputy Attorney General Mr. McNulty about whether he was comfortable with the process that was underway?
With the process that was underway, I don't recall such a conversation, but afterwards,
okay,
on the evening of Mr. Sampson's testimony,
I'm interested in the facts prior to. Did you ever talk to the head of the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys or anyone else other than Mr. Sampson about whether the process was identifying the proper U.S. attorneys to be relieved of their positions?
What I recall are conversations with Mr. Sampson. That's what I recall, Senator.
Did you at any time prior to your meeting on November 27, 2006 ask for a report in writing on the progress of the project?
I don't recall asking for a report in writing.
Final decisions were made at any time prior to November 27, 2006 when you approved the firings. Were you given or did you request a written memo or report giving the justifications for each of the decisions?
Senator, I don't recall that occurring again. What I recall is Mr. Sampson presenting to me a recommendation which I understood to be the consensus recommendation of senior officials at the department.
In light of the fact that you had so little to do with the decisions and made so little effort to understand...
I had everything to do with the decision. It was my decision.
Well, so little to do with the basis for the decision or why it was done, and you made so little effort to understand the reasons behind them, you really had no basis for telling the American people in your USA Today op-ed of March 7th that these U.S. attorneys had lost your confidence.
Senator, what I understood was that the recommendations reflected the consensus judgment of the senior leadership of the department, and that therefore the senior leadership had lost confidence in these individuals, thus the department had lost confidence. Now, I will say, I regret the use of those words, but clearly I understood that the senior leadership, that the recommendation made to me reflected the consensus view of the senior leadership of the department, of individuals who would know better than I about the qualifications of these individuals.
Well, I recognize that you've stated this now, but you could have taken immediate steps to correct the misstatements in this op-ed. You could have sent a letter to the editor. Instead, you let what is essentially a false statement sit out there, harming the reputation of dedicated public servants, and I think that's inexcusable.
Senator,
in light of the fact that you had so little to do with the decisions and made so little effort to understand the reasons behind them, you can't really say with certainty, as you did in your testimony today, quote, that there is no factual basis to support the allegation, as many have made, that these resignations were motivated by improper reasons, unquote. You can't really say that, can you?
Senator, I know the basis on which I made my decision, and I'm not aware of anything in the record. I'm not aware of any testimony which would seem to support the allegation that someone was motivated by improper reasons in making a recommendation to me. I don't think the document supports such an allegation, but just to be sure, I have asked the Office of Professional Responsibility to work with the Office of Inspector General to confirm this. I want to get to the bottom of this as well, Senator, just as you do. And I want to reassure the American people that there was nothing improper about what happened.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment at this point, but you didn't know then and you don't know today how each of these people actually made it onto that list that you were presented with on November 27th, do you?
Senator, I've gone back and searched the record. I've spoken with the Deputy Attorney General and asked him whether or not he stood by the decision. And so that is his view. That is my view. The decision stands. It should stand. And I believe it was a right decision. I regret the way in which it was implemented. There were obviously mistakes in the review process, and I've outlined to Senator Cornyn the things that I would have done differently that in hindsight, I think would have been more appropriate.
Well, you know, I'm obviously going to take that as a no to the question I actually asked, but you know, it's pretty clear that this is a situation that at the time you had no basis to know exactly how these people came to be on the list. The fact that various justifications have been made up or concocted after the fact doesn't cut it with me.
Senator, if you look carefully at the documents, you can see that there were people at the Department of Justice looking at various issues with respect to U.S. attorneys. A lot of documentation with respect to immigration and gun prosecution with respect to Carol Lamb. There is some documentation with respect to obscenity and Mr. Bogdan. There's documentation with respect to the information sharing and Mr. McKay. So there is documentation, Senator, about these reasons. Now, there may be other evidence or information in the minds of fact witnesses that you have access to that I don't have access to, but it's because I want to respect the integrity of this process.
There is no credibility to the notion that it was your considered judgment that those justifications were the reason for removing those people at the time. There's simply nothing in the record that demonstrates that you had a sufficient effort made to make that determination.